Welcome to today's webinar, Aligning the Path Forward, How Talent Intelligence Brings HR and Business Strategy Together. I have a few housekeeping notes before we begin. If you have any questions or technical concerns, please use the Q&A module on your screen. You can resize and minimize the different modules on your screen by using the options in the top right corner of each module. This event is being recorded and can be watched later on demand using the same link, and attendees will receive the recording of today's event. Look for that email within 24 hours post-event. We encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A module throughout the event for our speakers to address. You can also use the reaction module in the menu at the bottom to relay items you may like or want to express an emotion to. And now I'll pass the stage to Jason Serrato, Vice President, Talent Centered Transformation at Eightfold AI.
Thank you, Paige. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for everyone joining us. It's always great to partner with HR Executive, and for this hour, we're excited to partner with 360 Insights, who partnered with Eightfold on our annual talent survey this year, and we're excited to share some of the findings from that research. And I'm joined today by Dylan Tegger, a principal analyst from 360 Insights. Thank you for joining me, Dylan.
For having me, Jason. Pleasure to be here.
Looking forward to walking through the results of what we found from this year's study and having you share some of those insights. And really the focus is around aligning the path forward, especially in today's fast-paced world as organizations are facing lots of dynamic conditions and tons of uncertainty. So this is a little bit of a look back, but also getting some insights for how we're starting to address this looking forward. But again, really interested in diving into the research and understanding what we discovered. And it's been a great partnership with 360 Insights. So let's jump into the conversation. So with that, happy to have you kind of introduce the study and who was involved and kind of set the stage for us, Dylan. Take it away.
Sure. So 360 Insights partnered up with Eightfold to run this talent and HR leadership survey a couple months ago. Kind of curious as to what's driving, changes we're seeing in the HR industry, as well as just how HR and employment is kind of tying into the broader environment that we're kind of moving through right now. At 360 Insights, I look at workforce management very broadly, kind of how to achieve optimal workforce optimization, empowering leadership through better decisions, and enhancing the quality of work and life for employees. So this partnership with Eightfold was kind of the perfect way to go about doing that. So we ran two different surveys. We had one with 500 HR leaders at the VP level and above at companies with 5,000 employees or more across 6 countries. We had Australia, Canada, UK, Singapore, Germany, and the US. And then we also had another survey running simultaneously for 1,200 employees, full or part-time, in the same 6 countries. And we asked them, a slew of questions related to, their employment, how their HR leaderships are run, what their relationship is with executive leadership. And we got some really interesting results. Yeah, one of the main ones you see here, and one of the biggest takeaways we had was kind of the overall interaction HR was having with their leadership, especially in relations to business strategy and kind of general collaboration. A lot of the respondents felt like their overall company talent strategy didn't fully align with its overall business objectives, but kind of starting right here with this 53% you see. It was mainly with development and execution of the company's overall business strategy, just not really being on the same page with what HR wants to do and with what the executive level wants to do. There was just this, kind of two trains passing or two ships passing in the night of, both having their own individual goals, but not really sitting down and making sure they were on the same page.
So Dylan,
and when you look at it a little, Oh, sorry,
I
go
wanted
ahead.
to ask you a question about that. So, Dylan, do you think part of that is looking at the responses? There's an element here of being involved versus when you're involved. So you see here 35% consulted and 11% informed, which kind of speaks to exactly when in the process you're involved. Are you seeing that weigh in terms of sentiment, or that any differently from how you may have looked at this in the past, especially with the pace of change and the way business is moving?
I think it is changing. I think because more and more, and this is something I think people maybe feel broadly in certain Western economies generally, is more and more is everything is shareholder driven. So, and for a certain amount of time, as people have become a bit more market focused, less and less focus has been put on the actual people on the ground doing the work, like the foot soldiers of your business, the people actually dealing with customers, making sales, the tiny little blocks that add up to building, your grand structure as a business. And in that, HR has been kind of sidelined a little bit, not all the time, but HR is just as strategic as any other department in an organization. You're either going to hire the right people from the start, or you're not, and you're either going to value your roster or your of people of players you have at your company, or you're not. And if you're not, you're going to be having constantly little holes in your ship. You're going to be constantly taking on water and constantly fighting to correct decisions that were just not made from the outset. And that part of that comes from sitting down with your HR organization, being like, this is who we need, this is who we want, this is what we want to do with these people. And if you're not getting fully involved from the outset, well, then you're already kind of starting off in a rocky ground. So minimal involvement or no involvement is obviously, a very small percentage here. There's always some level of involvement, but are they being taken seriously is a different question.
So let's dive in a little further here. Okay.
So yeah, and you can see here, this is kind of the frequency of collaborating with the C-suite on strategic initiatives. And this is more of the long term. What is like what I was saying previously, kind of what is your business plan? What are your goals for the future? And how are we going to build a roster of people from the outset that are going to be a part of that, 3-year, 5-year, 10-year plan as a business? You can't really take on people that you expect to replace every year or every 18 months or 24 months when you have these long-term strategies. You're going to have a constant brain drain that's going to just put extra stress on the business that doesn't necessarily need to be there. Do you want to be focusing on hiring, or do you want to be focusing on hiring the right people that are going to take you on that journey to where you want to be as a business? And that's where collaborating on these strategic initiatives is very important for HR and very important from a leadership perspective. Getting all on the same page, understanding what the business objectives are, and taking them all as a whole, and figuring out where each part of the organization fits into that.
Yeah, and I think one of the key words I picked up on there was strategies. So when you're thinking about 3, 5, 10 years out, these things are not necessarily one plan or one strategy. It could be a variety of plans or a variety of strategies because of the dynamic nature of the market you're competing in, the dynamic nature of where the business may be headed, or options of where the business can spend its time or spend its resources. And I think that's the difference of being involved versus being consulted or informed, right? So I think this regularly versus occasionally versus rarely is something around being transactional and reactive versus more proactive, predictive, and driving, right?
That's exactly it. Yeah. Touching base here and there is not a bad thing, but when you're trying to all steer this big ship that is your business in the right direction, you kind of need all hands on deck. I apologize for all the nautical analogies. I don't know. It's raining in New York, so I guess that's not the top of the mind.
No problem. I've been in a lot of these sessions recently, and people are using the navigation theme quite frequently because we are, not to put another pun on it, in uncharted waters here.
There you go. Yeah. So lastly, and this was the last, in that kind of the trifecta of fully involved from the outset, regularly collaborating with HR and the C-suite, and then lastly, this part here, which is, HR leaders believing whether or not their company's talent strategy aligns with the rest of the business. And this kind of goes back to the fundamentals we were talking about a moment ago, is that if you want to have the right roster of people to get done what you want to get done, you want to do that from the get-go. You want to set a plan, figure out who you have and what you need to get it done, and then execute. You don't want to be doing that as you go. You don't want to be building, the car as you drive it and finding out how to do it. You want to make sure you have the right team of people on board to get it done and then execute your strategy from there. And it's not to say, 44% of people is, almost half. Pretty good start. But when you kind of take it all together, which we'll see, I think, in the next slide, is that only a very small amount of people are actually doing all three of these effectively, only about 18%. Yeah. And so for the purpose of the study, we considered this 18% to be, best in class, kind of the ones that are, they're talking to each other, they're collaborating regularly, and really they're just on the same page for what the goals are, what the strategy is going to be. And 1 in 5 doing that is not really the kind of numbers you want to see, mainly because this is not existing in a vacuum. This is existing in the larger economy, in the larger employment economy, and does begin to answer some of the bigger questions we have about engagement, about productivity loss, and other aspects. And when when organizations aren't on the same page, you're going to continually having these leaks, and it's going to be energy leaks about where your company wants to go, how your company is going to do it, and how it kind of trickles down to the people who are actually doing the work for you, and how they feel about it while they do it. And all this kind of getting lost, in broken telephone, a strategy that leaves out HR, or, your talent or people professionals, then being translated down to those people who then have to pick the people to do those jobs. If at every step you're losing some knowledge or some communication, you're going to have results of people that are unhappy at work or not going to do the work properly. And over time, it's going to degrade your ability to make effective plans and strategies.
So looking at this slide, you walked us through those different questions on the survey, and from the leaders, 53% were fully involved, and 52% say they were regularly collaborating, and 44% say they believe that their strategy was aligned. But you're saying here, looking at those respondents, there were only 18% that answered in that bucket across all three measures?
Exactly, yeah. So that 18% answered positively to all the previous things we looked at, which we called, being fully aligned, across, or best in class for the purposes of this study.
And I think based off of how this survey was constructed and those responses were built, I think the element here is timing, right? Being able to be engaged and act on the front foot versus being on the back foot and kind of being reactive or consulted or informed. Again, talks about kind of the nature of kind of best in class versus transactional, and as well as not only having a strategy or strategies, but having strategies that are aligned with where the business is driving and where it needs to go, and having the right people involved, right? So there's timing of this seems such a crucial element as the world of work is not only getting faster, but I think you also called out potentially asynchronous and remote and virtual. So we're also potentially playing telephone and sharing information in new ways and collaborating in new ways that may be working against this.
Absolutely. I think that reactive part is really important because if there's a strategic misalignment and HR is kind of just sidelined as being an administrative apparatus, you're going to have a lack of support with new initiatives that could actually help you bring on talent to get those bigger strategies done and to achieve those 3, 5-year, 10-year plans that we talked about. And if there's a devaluing of a department, then there's a weakness in your business. You know, either if a part of your business is not that important, then maybe you should reevaluate its purpose or functionality in your business, or you should harness it and figure out how to make the most of it. And that's the case kind of with the HR we were seeing in some of these in this study, was that a lot of people felt that they were just not being used as a strategic arm. They have the skill set to bring on the right people that are going to help make good decisions, and all those micro decisions are going to add up to a business that is effective. Yeah, and that's what leads us kind of directly into this here, the most important factors of achieving business and objectives. And the top one is retaining top performers. So how are we going to go about doing that? Well, you need to have an HR department and HR professionals that are going to be enabled to do those things. To capture the right people, to capture the attention of the right people is going to be one of the hardest things, or to go out and seek them. But also communicating the skills you're desiring out of a potential workforce, or the skills you're desiring out of your existing workforce. But the interesting thing here, which I think it creates this kind of complete cycle of why these problems persist, is that the top ones are, retaining top performers, understanding skills, capabilities across your workforce, and building a diverse workforce are kind of universals. I think people have always kind of wanted those. But when you look at the bottom here, that's where you kind of see how these problems become cyclical. So the bottom 3 priorities, in the confines of this survey, are advancing employees into leadership positions, improving succession planning, and then extending best practices to line management and leadership roles. Can't really achieve the top 3 without effectively doing the bottom 3. And that's where kind of that closed circuit of how this keeps happening. So you're just not really focusing on the right things to get your main priorities. It's fine that those are your main priorities, but executing on how to effectively succession plan people and how to effectively advance employees into leadership positions is a absolutely necessary way to build a resilient organization. Because you can keep bringing in the best people all the time, but if you're losing the leaders who really know the business from the inside out, you're just never going to have that foundation that's going to be really helping you move forward, to help you weather the hard times, to help you weather the challenges that might come in the future, the known knowns and the unknown unknowns, as they've used in the political science world.
Sure. And as I'm looking at how this chart was built, you also have how the answers were in terms of priority, ranked first, ranked second, ranked third. I still see here a lot of the responses that were ranked first still have to do with hiring as kind of the first priority. So we're still in a talent acquisition, recruitment led kind of focus, it seems.
We are, and I do think that's kind of a problem that's been created by shooting themselves in the foot. And I think that as we go through the results of the survey and kind of get into more of the employee perspective, we're going to realize that talent, that drive for talent, drive for recruitment, is partly based on the fact that people just don't want to stick around. And then, yeah, as we see here, skills was a big part of it. Understanding skills and kind of getting into that strategic mindset about skills and skill-based hiring was consistently something that people wanted to get better at. I think when you have high rates of turnover or higher rates of turnover, where people are kind of looking for jobs, as you'll see later on, 82% of people have been looking for a job in the last 12 to 18 months, I believe. That may be because they don't like where they work, but that's also maybe because they were hired for the wrong reason and they're not being used effectively at work. And that's where kind of understanding skills becomes more important. If you understand, maybe I was hired to do job A, but also I have the skills to be able to do job B and C as well. But understanding that individuals are not just a single set of skills, they're, multiple skills overlapping. That's a key way to kind of pick and choose the talent you have on your team. And if you want to really capitalize on the talent you have as well as gain new talent, you need to have a better understanding of the skills makeup of your talent network. And that means people existing at the company and people you're trying to bring in as well. Yeah, so looking at the priorities a lot of these companies had, again, recruiting better candidates to the talent pool was number one, lowering turnover rates, and identifying high performers to promote internally. These are things that make sense, of course, and any business is going to want to do these. I think probably at any point in history, there's businesses want to do this. They want to, recruit better people, lower the attrition rate, and identify high performers. Those I don't think were terribly surprising and shouldn't be terribly surprising. But the key factor of this, and it's more to remember when we get into the employee data, is that these are the main things they're looking to do. These top three is to keep people around to bring in the right people. But that messaging is being lost on people. It's part of that broken telephone as you get into the employee data, that HR is setting itself up to achieve these goals, but is kind of flopping on execution. Not all the time, but in a way that's causing a significant amount of people to look elsewhere.
Are there any other surprises here, maybe from what's at the bottom of the list? I know I'm looking at speeding up the process or analyzing data towards the bottom, and I would expect those to be a little higher, at least in the ranking.
Absolutely. And, for a significant number of people, they are still fairly high relative to the top ones. They're not as high as they could be, but speeding up the recruitment and hiring process was something that made a lot of sense in terms of obviously achieving the goals of lowering turnover rate and identifying top performers and recruiting better candidates, because you want to get the right people in sooner to get the work done sooner. But I guess one thing I kind of found interesting with the data here was the analyzing data to inform workforce decisions was ranked pretty low. And to speed up the recruiting and hiring process, you need to analyze the data better. And to do any of the top three or anything above anything on this list, you need to have better data to inform you about workplace decisions. And while the bottom one, gaining a better understanding of skills makeup for the talent network, was ranked last, again, it kind of ties back into that data piece. You need to have the right data to understand what you're looking at. Bad data feeds bad decisions, but good data can help correct those bad decisions. And if you just aren't prioritizing it and you aren't looking at the things what actually may help you, you aren't maybe comparing your strategies to the market or having a software that can compare you to other market decisions,
Sure.
and seeing what people are doing right, then you're going to be just on a bit of a meandering path. It could just not be the most effective path going forward.
So, Dylan, this is a great start to the conversation, but I want to take a moment to learn a little bit about who's in the audience. With the help of our producers, we did add a couple polls to the content today, and we're going to initiate a poll right now to try to poll the audience and get some live research during this session. So. Here is our poll question. Where do you think understanding the skills makeup of your workforce can drive the most impact in your organization? And there's a couple choices here, and we will let the audience take a moment to grab their mouse and navigate the slide here to respond. But I always like watching the results come in. It's kind of like a horse race. You see maybe some of the early responses and then who takes the lead. But Dylan, from this type of question and what you've seen and who you've been talking to, what type of results do you expect to see here?
I think it'll be, definitely in the direction of understanding skills is going to help drive impact in your organization. Kind of going back to what I said earlier is that not just for people coming in, but for people you already have, you need to understand less so who's on your team, but what they can each bring to the table. Kind of in that, the Moneyball analogy, if you've ever seen that movie. You can have people that maybe on the surface don't seem like the ideal candidate. They don't fit, that vision of what you have as the ideal person, but maybe they have some skills tied in with other people on your team that are going to bring the kind of change you need in your organization. It kind of affects everything. If you're able to manage your team effectively by understanding that, Jim brings this to the table, but when Jim works with Nancy, they coalesce into this person or this entity that can really tackle these certain types of problems. But if you just assume
Sure.
Jim and Nancy are these flat individuals that have a base set of tools that you hired them for and not other, B and C and D ranking of skills, you may not understand that you're able to kind of enable them to do things that they maybe didn't think possible within your team.
Well, we're going to go ahead and see the results. So thank you for everyone that has submitted a response so far. We'll just give a few more seconds for anyone else who still needs to submit. And stay close. We'll have another poll coming up shortly. But let's take a moment to look at the results. So where do you think understanding the skills makeup of your workforce can drive the most impact in your organization? And we have a tie. Photo finish, 27%, both for boosting performance, aligning skills with business goals, and staying agile, adapting to change with organizational agility. Let's look at the other results. We also have another tie for second, or third in this case, closing the gaps and planning smarter. Any reaction to that, Dylan? I don't think I've seen a two-way tie for first and a two-way tie for third before. This is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, especially 18.9%, very, very precise. But I think it makes a ton of sense. Skills is going to help close gaps and address skills gaps because kind of like I said, you're mixing the ingredients that you have on in your roster, and sometimes those come together to make interesting solutions to challenging problems. And oh, sorry, I think we jumped away there for a second. There we go. And it looks like the results are changing though. So, and then staying agile, again, it kind of goes back to setting that foundation from the get-go, having a foundation based on a skills that can address multitude of problems. People are not just good at one thing, they're good at other things, and they can adapt to different changes based on those skill sets. So kind of going back to the Jim and Nancy, situation that I mentioned, while their priority A skills, or maybe what you hired them for, B, their B, C, and D skills, when mixed together in the right time, can help you stay agile. People are hired to be adaptable, and understanding skills allows you to be adaptable. And it's not always just for the first thing you can think of when you think of that person. It's a more of a mixed salad of that.
I love it. So on to the next section. 71% agree they struggle with staffing challenges internally and externally. So this is another data point coming from the HR leaders, Dylan?
Yeah, this was, again, kind of goes back to that broken cycle that we saw. They're struggling with challenges internally, mainly because they haven't necessarily hired. I don't want to say they haven't hired the right person from the start, but they maybe haven't necessarily hired the right person from the start. And when you want to have internal growth, you want to have people that want a future, and a future that includes stability and promise and ambition within your company. Even if it's in a small way, they want to feel like they have a place to work today, tomorrow, and in the future in their job. Because growth is something everyone enjoys to achieve in these roles. So when you are struggling with challenges internally, it maybe involves stepping back and kind of looking at who's on your roster, what skills they have, kind of going back to that skill of intelligence aspect of it to it, or talent intelligent aspects of it, understanding the multitude of factors that make up the talented people on your team, and externally understanding what your business needs. Because if you're part of the reason people are struggling with staffing challenges is because of, yes, the greater economic setting. People's demands are changing as to what they want out of work, but also maybe you're not asking the right questions in your hiring practices. Maybe you're putting out the wrong messages in your external hiring search. And if you're able to cast perhaps a broader net by understanding that there's a variety of skills that could help solve this problem or fill this role, then maybe you're going to open yourself up to different possibilities in the hiring process.
But how did
that
that
comes
play
down to
out?
kind of knowing what skills you need now and in the future.
Yeah, how did that play out in the data? Let's take a look. This one was shocking for me a little bit.
Yeah, this one was, pretty surprising for us as well. It just goes to show you kind of that there's this, it goes to show you the continued disconnect here between what HR leaders feel that they're doing and then how it's being received by employees. Because obviously, as we've seen earlier, there's a disconnect between the first line of communication. There's a friction there between executives and HR. So there's a friction there, that's mashing up the message that the business wants to HR to find the right people. So HR feels like, okay, we're on a good track here. We got the tools we need, but they're already starting off on the wrong foot because there's been a disconnect between the leadership. And then when they go to communicate that to people on the outside, in the outside world, it's confusing. The messages are lost. Maybe you're asking for skills that are overvalued, or you're undervaluing skills that you need, and you're not compensating people properly. And that leads to the 82% of people surveyed or employees surveyed saying they're actively looking for a new job, because maybe that happened to them and maybe this is now the result. But the data on the reason people are looking for new roles is pretty extensive. We had a lot of responses from people, and we can get into that if you like.
So I would have to assume, from a hierarchy perspective, obviously compensation weighs in on this, but once compensation is accounted for the number to be 82%, you're acting on other things as well. So I have to assume dealing with a lot of uncertainty and ambiguity around maybe how they fit into the organization today, but also if I don't understand how I fit into the organization today, and I also don't necessarily know where we're headed in the future, it's really hard for me to see myself here in the future if I'm having trouble seeing myself here today. Is that
Absolutely.
what you're seeing coming out of the data here?
Definitely. And I think that ties into kind of another big piece of data that we saw, which is that employee satisfaction was at 61%. And which means that HR and corporate initiatives have to catch up to employee needs, mainly because it just leads to lower performance. And then that leads into the 82% of employees looking for a new job. People are not performing as well because they're less engaged. Happier, from a couple studies from Oxford and the Journal of Labor Economics, happier workers are about 10 to 13% more productive. And this will tie back into this, but if you assume that means if you're in a company of 1,000 people, if everyone's not working at, let's say, roughly 100% every day, or whatever 100% meets your business, it's almost the equivalent of about 50 people not showing up to work every single day, every year for your business. And how that kind of translates into this 82% of employees surveyed is when you apply that across the entire business, you have people showing up to work every day that are just not as happy as they could be. There's maybe a negative managerial influence. Managers account for a big part of team engagement and kind of overall employee happiness. And then externally and internally, there's high levels of daily stress, people dealing with loneliness, negative emotions about work and the economy. And then when you look at the responses we got from people, pay and benefits and culture are the main reasons to look for another job, but also to to select a job as your top choice. And so there's clearly some people are saying what they want. They want better pay, want better benefits, and they want a kind of restoration of that social contract, I guess you could say, fair work for fair wages, for fair results for everyone. But it seems that there's, I don't want to say there, I would say almost a sense of denial from leadership as to what's actually causing this. People say people don't want to work, or that there's other changes in people that are making them not be productive, but it's actually, this is a two-way street. You have to give people what they want, but also you have to meet people where they are. They have to meet in the middle somewhere. And right now, I think people are just not feeling like they're being valued at work because maybe they weren't hired for the right reason. And they don't like the company culture, or they don't like the messages they're receiving from the higher powers at work. And so now you have 4 out of 5 people looking for a different job.
And one of the ways that you started digging into this in the research was, how are people receiving that information? How are they learning about the organization? How are they being communicated to about those potential opportunities or futures? And I think that was another aha moment for me, which is, I think, the next section here. Can you walk us through this visual?
Yeah, so this talent matrix here kind of looks at the things people have higher importance in, have high, importance versus satisfaction in the simplest sense. It's so in the top right, you're going to see things of high importance, high satisfaction, things that are important to workers, make them feel good. Bottom left, it's the opposite. Not so important, doesn't make you feel that great. And it is a little confusing, some of this data. So main reasons from the survey that people weren't happy at work, just to keep it top of mind: poor compensation and benefits, too many demands for from the employers for too little pay, poor management in toxic work environments, excessive workload, poor work-life balance, lack of career growth and opportunity, and poor communication and support from leadership that kind of leads to overall job insecurity and stability issues. So the things that rank low in this matrix, oddly enough, despite all that, are mentor programs and career pathing. So while this may seem a little contradictory to the above, because clearly people want to have a better stability in their job and maybe a future in their job, and those things would play into it, it's clear that the basics are just not being done. So maybe there's a lack of trust that mentorship programs, career pathing are actually going to make any difference when the basics such as culture and pay are not being done properly. And maybe people just have a bad taste in their mouth. So what I found interesting was that effective performance reviews was one of the top things in this. So people still want to have that. They're open to that dialogue. They want to have that dialogue about what they're doing right, where they could go, and where they can build. But the issue is that maybe the other things that you're seeing more on the left side here are just weighing them down a little bit. So then that's why things such as mentor programs and career pathing are not being done effectively or not being done in a way that they believe. So it's kind of holding back that lack of trust between the two groups is kind of holding back the performance reviews aspect that shows that people are actually open to positive change in their career. They're open to hearing about how they're doing, hearing about where they fit in, and having an open dialogue with their leadership and management. And that ties into something I found interesting in the data was that younger demographics, it was more important for them to have a job they cared about and had meaning than money. And that's where it ties back into the performance reviews and clearly, defining what work means to them in their life. But ultimately pay is an important factor, but it is more than that.
And then the things that are in the top left here, opportunities for promotion, transparency around career development, opportunities to pivot into new areas. These are things that are obviously changing as organizations change, as careers change, as the way people work changes, job paths, career ladders, all of these are changing in real time. But also, this requires culture change too, especially with the need for transparency and understanding. Do I know what opportunities are available to me? Do I feel like I'm being considered? And am I aware of how I map to what they are? And how much do I know, where to find them or where to go to see these different opportunities? So I think this also speaks to maybe some of the ways or where some of the people that you surveyed were also investing their time. A lot of them were investing their time in hiring new people and potentially neglecting some of these areas around moving people or finding challenges with moving people because of how things had been done or internal processes. Did that also come through in the data? Part of that misalignment, part of that hole in the bucket?
Absolutely. And I think you kind of hit it right there with just the misalignment that starts at the top spreads out through the entire organization. So if you're just hiring people, if you just have this kind of culture of replacement, people aren't going to believe that there's any opportunities for promotions. They're just going to keep thinking that, well, they're just going to hire someone else. I'm not competitive within my own company to even have a viable chance for promotion. And messaging like that is where the strategic aspect of HR comes in, is that if you do value your people and you do want to interpromotionally and you do want to have top talent, then you don't want to let that top talent go. They already work for you. And yeah, while they can go and look on their own time, they're already in the building, let's say, maybe not these days, but they're already under the same roof.
Yeah.
You could just pick them. There is some loyalty that's there because, again, stability is a big part of it, and feeling valued somewhere is always important to people.
I've heard that phrase 3 times in the last week. Business leaders saying the talent we need is already within our 4 walls, whether they be real or virtual. But how do we better identify them? How do we better engage them? How do we better inform them of where they can go? And how do we understand them in new ways so we understand what they're capable of as the world of work changes right in front of us, right? It's this timing, this alignment, all of this understanding, using some of that data in new ways, which is causing this change, this uncertainty. And maybe it's also why that navigation metaphor is being used so frequently as well.
Definitely. And I think it's also business leaders need to be honest with themselves they need to be self-critical about how they look to employees.
Yeah.
Because I think right now there's a great distrust between line worker, let's say, and the bosses. People don't trust them. They don't think their best interest is in mind, and that needs to be restored. And this perfect segue right here, because the rapid pace of change and evolving employee needs is exactly that. I think employers can't be telling employees what they should want. the employees curate that part of the discussion. And part of that is keeping your ear to the ground about the pace of change and what people want. And that comes down to just listening to them. It's as simple as that. And being open and minded enough as a business leader to be essentially open to admit you're wrong. And again, that comes back to good data in, good data out. If you're honest with the information you're taking in and getting it from reliable sources that are going to tell you the truth, then you're going to be making decisions about your business and about your people that resonate with them. And that kind of comes into AI tools, because AI is not without its biases, of course, but it is rational in a way that we are maybe not as human beings. And that's going to be vital for people to kind of see what they look like to people. And then, you have the Glassdoors, you have the other review sites about how people view your company, what their experience was like. But what if you didn't have to what if you didn't have to wait till the process was already done to have that information? If you could, ask the people, talk to the people that are on board right now, and in a way that makes them feel comfortable, explaining how they feel, explaining where they feel like the company's going. And part of that ties into the use of AI, because AI can take that anecdotal information, but also compare it to productivity metrics, outcomes, other aspects. Again, tying back into the skills and talent databases that you may have, but you need to build those databases to begin with. And that requires a vast amount of information. So
I also think AI as a tool helps with expediting the process of doing some of this, right? The ability to do this continuously and learn dynamically and break out of some of the cyclical annual cycles and calendars we've had in the HR function. So keeping up with the pace of change and trying to create that alignment and get on the front foot and be more proactive. AI as a tool for a variety of use cases, as seen here, is one of the ways to do that with on-time kind of real demand, on-demand real-time data, right?
Absolutely. And it's going to give you it, hopefully, in a way that's as bloodless as possible, in a way that's not as emotionally driven, in a way that's more factually driven. And I think that's why people have so much optimism about it. And that's why you see the high numbers here of 96% of companies currently use or plan to use AI tools and technology. People see the value in good data. People see the value in how it can affect the rest of their business. So in a recruitment and hiring, well, I think you always want a human touch in it. I think it is going to maybe help you have that Moneyball effect, where you kind of see the things that maybe the human, feel, and your perception of someone is maybe going to obscure. So maybe just the way you don't, maybe the way someone talks annoys you, but listen, they have a set of skills that is going to be game changing to your company. And that's something that AI can kind of pick out, because they have a different set of things that they're looking at in people. They have a different set of values. And while, yes, we set the values for AI and how it interacts with people, it's able to bring something to the table that the human mind maybe would overlook or just wouldn't see at all. And it can analyze so much data so much faster, so it can look at all these candidates a lot faster. It could look at bringing on new employees faster, because it just has the process completely streamlined down to a process, because it's run it 1,000 times in the last 10 minutes,
Yeah.
in its processing speed.
So thank you for walking us through that, Dylan. I think there's some incredible insights here. And if even just looking at the plans to adopt or currently considering data here, if we looked at this chart a year or so ago, I think those percentages would look very different. As promised, for the people in the audience, we do have another poll. So let's see that poll here. and see if we can get some responses here of how the people in the audience may be integrating AI into their HR operations today. So we just shared what our respondents said and some of the use cases that they're already using or considering. Let's see if we can get some feedback from the audience here. So hopefully people can see this poll question. This poll question is now live. How integrated is AI in your HR operations today? And let's see if we get some responses here. So we have a couple coming in. The options are fully embedded, selective use, basic adoption, exploring possibilities are not yet explored. And I was even referring yesterday, I was having a conversation to those surveys and pieces of research where they ask HR leaders, is your organization using AI today? And they'll say no. And then they ask the same question of the employees, and the employees say yes, right? So this misalignment, this disconnect, this are you aware of how work is getting done? So I'm interested to see what our respondents say here. What are your thoughts, Dylan?
I think people are going to be selective about how they use it. And I think basic adoption about AI is kind of ground level now. People are interested in it. They see the potential, and I think they understand that if they don't use it, they're going to start falling behind. And I agree with you that it does bring a level of insights that we just didn't have before. It just it has the mind. It is a force multiplier for yourself. It can bring in a lot more data, help you process it, help it kind of you digest it in a way that you'd otherwise would have had to spend a whole day on previously. And that's kind of where you see the main positives in the survey data, is that people are excited about the efficiency, about the automation, about the improvement of just general functionality, especially when it comes to, again, housing data and being user-friendly in the way it gives it to you in output. Where previously people were just afraid about job replacement, skeptical about the future. Now that people have interacted with AI, more of the concerns are about high cost, security, limitations with complex tasks, because people are entrusting AI with highly complex tasks. And the results are still mixed as we work through the the growing pains of it. And adaptability. People are always going to be a little scared of new technology, but I think the more we integrate it, the more we see the positives in tiny ways, even if it's just like in the kind of the ability to digest 5 news articles and tell you all about it instead of you reading all 5. Things like that are kind of the small steps towards a bigger use of it.
Let's see our poll results here. So again, we have a tie for second, but first is exploring. Tie for second, basic adoption and selective use. Less than 5% fully embedded. Not surprising, but a pretty interesting number to think about for a second there. 18% not yet explored. And I bet that is looking at it from the organization, but maybe if we looked at it from how work gets done, that data may look different. But very much along the lines of the themes that we were seeing here. And I always love doing these polls. It gives us some real-time data, and we look back and look at that information compared to some of the research that we were sharing. So Dylan, thank you for walking us through that. What I want to do now is I just want to walk through a little bit about our involvement with this research with 360 Insights and how talent intelligence comes into play, and really just share that how talent intelligence comes into play is it helps organizations do a lot of the underlying things that I think they're trying to achieve, but also are weighing in at why this has been difficult in the past, right? What talent intelligence affords is the ability to make better sense of your organizational data. It allows for the incorporation of market data and external data in context, relevant to your industry, to benchmark peers, to what's happening from a broader data set, as well as what's happening with your users, employees, talent network, to create a variety of outcomes. So it feeds the ability for an AI engine, like the one we have at Eightfold, to drive outcomes that support individual use cases as well as organizational use cases. And whether you're an applicant, a candidate, an employee, a manager, it can help with a variety of things around matching to jobs, seeing career paths, looking how your skills may align to new roles or may be adjacent with some learning to new career paths, or help the organization with things like planning, how you do campaigns, how you do workforce planning, how you do things like succession, maybe how you handle acquisitions or a reorg or a redeployment of people from one area to another. And what happens is this helps with the speed of doing this work, the analyzing of data in supporting this work, and then creating this kind of win-win for all the various stakeholders throughout this process, which I think was maybe an underlying thread through some of these results. But the other thing is, by doing this in a system of intelligence, this also begins to learn as it goes and establishes context of where are these decisions and insights and recommendations occurring, and how is this organization making decisions, and how is that different from other organizations, or how does that compare to the market? And the more it learns, the more it gathers, the more specific it begins to understand that context of that organization, and can even start to make the distinction between different disciplines, different functions, different departments, different locations. And that's how it builds intelligence over time. So I think this is one of the ways where the time element of the discussion we've talked about today, the visibility element of strategic planning with workforce needs, as well as the transparency, feed into maybe some of the path ahead for addressing the misalignment and creating better alignment. I also think it potentially allows for the ability to have strategies and not just a strategy, because you may need multiple plans in an uncertain future that's happening dynamically and changing right before our very eyes. So one of the things I wanted to show was this is what that looks like kind of from an employee experience perspective, where there's this user experience that's supported underlying with this data layer powered by talent intelligence. And I think that's where some of the research and some of the findings and some of the work we're trying to achieve with HR leaders start to align with the path forward, right? You can have this user layer that leverages things like skills, but creates some personalized guidance in the organization around potential future roles, around ways to develop and ways to learn, training, projects, mentors, things you can find along the way. But also, this isn't static and stagnant. This is dynamic. It learns as it goes, as the organization changes, or as roles evolve, or as someone adds skills. This continues to move and shape and change in real time. So this creates some transparency, it creates some understanding, but this also creates visibility for the leaders that are trying to put together plans to align with the business and be more proactive and more predictive and not have to always be on the back foot. And as part of this, wanted to share just one little story of a customer case study that we've done here at Eightfold with an organization called Amdocs, where they started applying talent intelligence for a variety of use cases, originally with talent acquisition, later with talent management, and then started using some of that into some of their strategic planning. And as they've created the visibility to do this and the speed and continuous nature that AI enables, they're finding better alignment between the wants and needs and career paths and goals of their employees, and the agility to keep up with the pace of change that's being asked and desired by their business leaders. And they've created a program where that they've actually coined the name Harmony, and I love that name, because it creates the ability where there's a greater likelihood for these two things to potentially have alignment in the future as you're moving towards the future and trying to navigate these waters. In some of their immediate returns, almost half of their positions are now filled internally, right? So this ability to use this technology and use the data to become more proactive and more predictive and to increase that speed helps with some of the underlining timing initiatives, but also help with potentially creating that connection and between the needs and wants of the talent in the organization, connecting the talent management efforts with the talent acquisition efforts. So maybe not every response is to create a requisition. Maybe you know your internal talent within in a more dynamic, robust way, and you start to incorporate them in your searches. But then also the ability to plan for a variety of dynamic futures. So wanted to share that as a nice kind of bow on the conversation, because I think, you know, the findings from the research are very telling, and it's been great to partner with 360 on this. But we're also seeing how tools like talent intelligence are starting to help some organizations that are on this journey in dealing with the rapid pace of change, trying to create better alignment and trying to connect some of the wants and needs of their workforce with the demands and challenges of their business. So I share that as a quick little case study or vignette, and there's more information on that on the Eightfold website if you'd like to learn more. But with that, I think we've landed right on time, and I'd love to hand the session back over to Paige and the HR executive team. Thank you, Dylan, for joining me today, and for those that attended, hope you enjoyed the session.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for attending today's webinar. You may disconnect and have a great rest of your day.